and the John Birch Society.
Thank you. A little bit of introduction for those of you who don't know who or what the Birch Society is. We've been in existence for 65 years. The purpose of it is to restore constitutional principles, constitutional understanding, and to hold elected officials accountable to the Constitution. My personal story that pertains to this is that I had an unwilling participation in a call for a constitutional convention. I was a homeschool mom and decided to do something pretty darn crazy with my kids in 2012. They were 18 and 20, and they, together with me, decided to go off on an adventure to go live in a country where we had never been, didn't speak the language, didn't know anybody, had no clue how we were going to support ourselves, and had enough money to support ourselves for 5 months before we were out of money and no way to come home. We had sold everything that we owned. The long story short is we chose Chile because it was the seventh most economically free nation in the world, as the United States at that time was only the 14th economically free nation in the world. I also knew that Chile had, in 1973 and after, chased out all of the communists out of their country. Some of them willingly, some unwillingly, but tens of thousands of families were forced out of Chile due to their communist thinking. And unfortunately, by 1990, they were allowed to return again. But still, when I went there in 2012, Chile was absolutely at the height of its greatness. They had gone from 70% poverty to 7% poverty in a mere short 30 years through the introduction of free market economics. Suddenly in 2019, there was a revolution happening, supposedly over a 4-cent increase in the price of the public transportation system. That didn't make sense to me. And within 10 days, a call by a million people for a constitutional convention. Now, I have to read something here because I want to tell you that what we're talking about, regardless of whether you call it a constitutional convention, a convention of the states, according to Black's Law Dictionary, a constitutional convention is, and I think we would all agree on this, a duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people of the state or nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending its constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution provides that a constitutional convention may be called on application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. Back to my story of Chile. So I just mentioned constitutional convention. I will use that term because that is historically what it has always been called. There is no differentiation between what they're proposing and what I'm proposing. Article 5 of the Constitution provides 2 ways to amend the Constitution. One is the first way and the only way that we have ever used since 1787. The state legislators, the state representatives in the House and the Senate must propose amendments that then go back to the states for ratification. The second method has never been used since 1787. There are good reasons for that, and I will try to touch on that in the few short minutes that I have. I also want to mention that this is a debate, but there are 2 groups that are here proposing and suggesting that this is a good idea, and one opposing it, so I have less time than they do to tell you why this is a bad idea. Back to my story on Chile. So the people actually thought this was a great idea to have a constitutional convention. 79% of the people voted in favor of this. What happened at the first convention was that it turned into the most Marxist document that had ever been written. And quickly, when it was brought back to the people for ratification, 64% of the people said, that is not what we thought a convention was, and this is not what we want. So it failed, and it went back to the original constitution that they were rioting and looting and destroying their country over, supposedly. The second convention that they had was the right-leaning the right-leaning Congress trying to appease the left that was tearing down the country and destroying it, and said, okay, well, we'll try to appease them just a bit without destroying the Constitution. And that got voted down because the left said, this is not good enough, it didn't take this far enough. The results being they have reverted back again to the first Constitution that they were rioting over. The one question that I asked everybody while I was still in Chile, because I did finally leave, assuming and knowing that this is the death of a nation, was I asked everyone who was in favor of this, what specifically is in the Constitution that is causing all of these things that you are rioting and looting over and you want fixed? The answer was, no one could answer that question. No one could identify the problem in the Constitution. They just had heard that if stuff is going on that you don't like, you could fix it by having a convention. Well, then let's have the convention. Let's bring it on. My question for you today is, we do not differ on what the problem is. We have an out-of-control federal government. Would you agree?
Yeah.
We agree on the problem. Now, when you're diagnosing a problem, do you not need to know what is the root cause of it? Do you just go cut out the cancer and hope and pray that the cancer is gone? Or do you diagnose and say, but how did the cancer originate? What was the cause of this cancer that caused this? I'm going to challenge you that the Constitution is not the problem, and amending the Constitution is not the solution. That's one thing. But if you were to want to amend the Constitution, I dare say it's worked 28 times in our country to do it in the first method, which will only allow that one proposal to be addressed. A convention, they will tell you, can be limited and can be controlled and will follow the rules. You know, like all the rest of our rules are being so well adhered to right now, right? Those rules and assurances that they are giving you are not there. I challenge you also, don't trust what I have to say. Go do your research. I have plenty of it. I'll provide you with lots of things. They will provide you with lots of things, and use your own mind. I tend not to go into Supreme Court decisions this and Supreme Court decisions that. I'm appealing to your common sense. This is Wyoming. I love Wyoming. Why? Because you're simple, hardworking ranchers, farmers, people, and you know what? You're the last of the breed with common sense. I am appealing to your common sense. Address the root cause of the problem and seek a solution that will fix the root cause of the problem. What is the root cause of the problem? I will appeal to you and say the Constitution is not the problem. It is, in fact, the solution. The Constitution was written by the states. The states said, you know, we have a little bit more need of a national government. Before that, our first Constitution, if you aren't aware, was the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was not quite doing its job. You couldn't raise money for armies, for example. And so there was a call for a convention based on the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation stated that the one rule that they had was that if any proposals were made to amend or revise the Constitution, it had to be unanimous consent by all 13 states to agree to amend the Articles of Confederation. What actually happened in 1787 was the delegates were sent there with their, and I'm forgetting the term, we were trying to think of it beforehand, with their commissions. There you go. I knew if I gave them enough time it would come. They were sent with their commissions to revise the Articles of Confederation. When they got there were several who brought the Virginia plan and the Kentucky plan, and they started to look at it and say, you know, we really could make this a whole lot better. If we just, let's just take a look if we were to write a whole new Constitution. Some of the delegates there said, whoa, wait a minute. No, I was sent here only to amend the Articles of Confederation. I don't have the authority to go rewriting a new Constitution. I'm out of here, I'm going home, because that wasn't what I was sent here to do. So now they faced a little bit of a problem. They knew they couldn't get unanimous consent for any of this. I would say thankfully they did rewrite our Constitution. And the way that they got around their commissions is that they appealed to the highest power. Who is the highest power in the land? We, the people. So they said, you know what? We know we're gonna go outside our authority. We were not granted the authority or sent here to rewrite our Constitution. But if we are to do this, we must appeal to the highest power in the land. We must appeal to we, the people. That was what the Federalist Papers were all about. It was the Constitutionalists appealing to the people and selling them on these ideas. Whereas the Anti-Federalists said, hey man, this goes too far. You're giving them powers you shouldn't be giving them. We're not so much in favor of this. This is what the debate was going on then. So the only precedent we have of a convention in order to pose amendments to the Constitution was the Articles of Confederation, was the 1787 Convention. They will tell you we've had lots of conventions. We have never had since 1787 a national convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the national government or the federal government. This has not happened. Why is it that has not happened? Because those that are willing to dive deep and to listen to our founding fathers will recognize that they warned us that a second convention would not be a good idea. I have the quote of Madison here somewhere, but I have so many piles of papers here I can hardly think through all of this. But James Madison himself said he would tremble at the thought of a second convention. The safer mode would be to address one issue and one amendment. What they're not going to tell you is what the real risks are of a convention. Let me ask you all, you're all Republican activists, politicians. At your state convention, what is the first committee that meets? The Rules Committee. So can you have rules to your convention before the delegates are chosen and before the delegates convene? No, because it is only the delegates that will write the rules for that convention. So when they tell you that this is safe, we already know what the rules are. They may have come up with ideas and proposals for it, but it is in fact only the delegates who will be writing the rules for this convention. But then who will the delegates be? Well, gosh, we don't know who the delegates will be. So how could we know what the rules will be? Another issue is that they will attempt to assure you that this is safe. We're only going to deal with this one thing. May I remind you, during COVID here in Wyoming, your legislator convened for a special session. How do you get a special session? All of you have to sign on that you're having a special session for one purpose and one purpose only, right? Many of you were there. You came to address the emergency measures of COVID. You didn't get that done, but you figured, gosh, we're here already. You know, we may as well deal with this gambling bill. Did you adhere to your commissions that you were sent there for to do?
No.
No, you did not. So may I remind you that even here in Wyoming, you can't stick to your one topic that you were sent there to do, and it ran away, if you want to call it that. Now, this addressing the issue of the runaway convention. A runaway convention, the reason why some people say this, I don't like to use that term because I don't really think that it did run away. I do think that they went outside the boundaries of their commissions that they were sent there to do. But again, they appealed by the Declaration of Independence. James Madison tells us himself. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government. It later says, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. That is the power that we, the people, have. You are being assured, no, you are the highest power, you are the state legislators. And yet we, the people, actually are the proper authorities of this, and we have the right to overthrow it. Now, I also would like to tell you that when they say that no, only one amendment can be dealt with. Article 5 says, the Congress, when 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. So Congress can do it, as it always has, or on the application of the legislators of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. They actually don't call. You can and may apply for a convention to Congress. Are you circumventing Congress by applying to them for a convention? Good question, right? But I wanted to point out that this is for proposing amendments, plural. Does that mean a convention can be limited to one topic? If it's amendments, is it a limited convention or is it a general convention? Where in the Constitution does it say that you can limit a constitutional convention? Are you at your state convention? Is that a limited convention? Or can everything be discussed? The danger in all of this is what could be brought up and who will be there at the convention. Now let me tell you, I have lived outside this country a total of 17 years. I have a pretty good perspective on America and Americans, which I kind of think you can only get from being on the outside looking in. I feel that the great Achilles heel of Americans is that we are good people. And I say Achilles heel because good people assume that other people are good people. Do you think that there are people in the United States that we live amongst, not so many in Wyoming, that we live amongst, that hate America and would love to see the destruction of our Constitution? Absolutely. Would you say that it's pretty well 50%? Again, maybe not in Wyoming, but nationwide, it's pretty well 50% of people who would love to see the destruction of this country. What is the best way to take down a country? Through its supreme law of the land. This isn't the first time it's done. When I started to see this happening in Chile, I had very many friends from Venezuela in Chile. Why? They'd lost their country. They had to go to another country to survive. And I asked them, do you know what's going on? And they said, absolutely, Leah, this is exactly how it started in Venezuela. It was over the price of the bus system that started the revolution that changed Venezuela. And the goal of Venezuela was to get the people to vote to amend the Constitution. What they said, and I heard it in Chile all the time, it's too hard to get the Constitution changed. It's supposed to be. Did you know that? It's supposed to be very difficult to change it. If it's worthy of changing, wouldn't it likely have been already done? We've done it 28 times. Now, one other issue that they will mention, don't worry. They're going to reassure you constantly, don't worry. Nothing bad can happen. 3/4 of the states have to rescind this. Now, let me ask you, do we have any bad amendments to the Constitution? No. Yes, we do. Prohibition was one of them that we actually successfully rescinded. But it got passed, it got rescinded. How about the 16th and 17th Amendment? Absolutely. They're starting to agree with us because we've been saying this for a long time. The 17th Amendment robbed you, the state legislators, of the power that you had to choose a representative that would support the state of Wyoming. That amendment stole you of the power that you had back then. So can bad amendments get passed through the resolution process? Absolutely. And my final point is about rescission. The rescission requirements of the Articles of Confederation was that 100% of the states, at that time 13 states, had to agree to amending the Constitution. But wait a minute, Rhode Island didn't even show up. They said, hey, this is crazy, you can't do that. And other delegates, I believe some from New York, said, we don't have the authority to do this, we're out of here. So they knew at the convention they couldn't get 100% to agree to changing the Constitution. So they changed the rescission process to only 3/4 of the states. Now only 9 of the 13 states had to agree upon these changes. And it was a battle to get these changes put through. Could possibly, in a state of such division in this country, knowing that we were unlikely to get much of anything passed, do you think that if they were to say, let's appeal to the people, Let's have a people's referendum of whether they want these changes to be made. It's the most democratic thing to do. Wouldn't this be a beautiful argument at a convention to say, let's change the rescission process to not 3/4 of the states, and by the way, you're told that you, the legislators, will decide on these changes, but it mentions in here, or Congress can decide that state conventions will ratify this, not you. So the only power you as legislators ever actually have is to apply for a convention. Once your application is in, Congress will determine many of the rules, but primarily the delegates that are chosen will appeal to those rules. So beware of the promises and false assurances that they're provided to you, and I look forward to providing more information as rebuttals.
Thank you. Okay, Convention of States will step up for up to a 5-minute rebuttal, and I'll give you a 1 minute and a 30-second warning.
I want to give you just, my name is Mike Ferris. I want to give you just a little bit of a tour to the material that we've handed out to you. One is my resume. I am a constitutional lawyer. I have litigated 2 cases, and won them both in the Supreme Court of the United States. One for religious freedom, and one for free speech for pro-life pregnancy centers. That case I won in 2018 in the Supreme Court of the United States when I was president of the Alliance for Defending Freedom. Our legal team wrote the law in Mississippi that ended up in the Dobbs case. My legal team was the legal team alongside co-counsel. I led the team that reversed the Roe versus Wade. I have written, and you have in front of you, the definitive answer on the history of the adoption of the Constitution of the United States, answering the defamation that you just heard from. The defamation that our Constitution was illegally adopted. It's just not true. The fanciful conversations that she's concocted about what was said at the Constitutional Convention, go read the records of the Constitutional Convention. Those conversations never happened. They never happened. Why? Because she's got it all wrong. In my formal speech, I'll give you more of the details. But let me just, I don't have time in my formal speech to talk about the ratification process. She's calling it the rescission process.
Sorry, I used the wrong one, ratification.
It's the ratification
Yes.
process. She doesn't know the history, she doesn't know the terminology. But the reality is that the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787 passed 2 documents, not one. They passed the Constitution, and they passed a recommendation for changing the process for ratification. Where did it go? It went to Congress. What did they do? Congress unanimously approved the method of the new ratification method. Where did it go? Did it go to the ratification conventions then? No, it went to the state legislatures. All 13 state legislatures, including Rhode Island, voted to approve the new ratification process. So rather than running away and running off to the ratification process, as she's described it, she's missed the true history, the full history of what's going on. And the real history that she's missed, and you have the document in front of you, is the history of the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society stood before the Wyoming legislature in 1959 and told you, we need the Liberty Amendment. It was a good amendment. And the Liberty Amendment repealed the 16th Amendment, did other good things. The founding president of the John Birch Society, Robert Welch, ran a national campaign to get states to call for a convention of the states to amend the Constitution of the United States to enact the Liberty Amendment. What was the first state that followed the John Birch Society and agreed to call for a convention of the states? It was Wyoming. Your legislature was the first one. Back in 1959, you've got the resolution in front of you. The John Birch Society was here telling you what I'm telling you. The revisionists that have taken over the John Birch Society lie about the history of how we got the Constitution, defame the Constitution, because if you say the Constitution was illegally adopted, you're saying it's illegal. If we're going to follow the law, we should still be under the Articles of Confederation. They're not telling you the truth about the convention in 1787. They're not telling you the truth about the ratification process, and they're not telling you the truth of the John Birch Society. Because it was the John Birch Society that got you to pass a resolution in 1959. And they are revisionists, undermining their own history of their own organization. They can't explain to you how they reverted against the decisions of their own founder, Robert Welch, and for that matter, their second president, Larry McDonald. Finally, for this brief time, the Black's Law Dictionary definition that she gave you. A constitutional convention is three kinds of conventions. You can write a whole constitution, you can revise a constitution, or you can amend a constitution. It doesn't mean you can do all three just because it's in Black's Law Dictionary. Black's Law Dictionary doesn't give you the law, it gives you a general definition of words. The law is that if you call a convention, it's for the purpose of amending the convention. What's its purpose? Its purpose is to follow the application that came. We've had 450 applications for a convention in the history of the country. We've never had a convention. Why? Because we've not agreed on the topic. Agreeing on the topic is the beginning point. Until you get there, you can't have a convention. So I'll have more to say in just a couple of minutes.
Thank you. U.S. term limits. U.S. term limits.
All right. It's got off to quite the start. We are the third path, so I'll try to stay out of historical debate with Michael Ferris because the man knows an awful lot. Constantine Carrard, it's a lot of name. Just CQ's fine. With U.S. term limits, similar to Commission of States, except where a single subject would kind of opens up an altered path. We'll get to that when I get my 20 minutes. He corrected some of the things I was going to say. This is just sort of the rebuttal portion. We're actually all good people. Don't hold my black hat against me. I am a good person. I'm here for good reasons. And I see some black hats in the crowd, so I'm not the only one. There is a school of thought that says do nothing. Just write angry emails to Congress, let Congress fix it. It's only $38 trillion in debt. It's just this imperial Congress that runs over our lives and doesn't care about us. So that is an option. Doing nothing is always going to be an option. But you're in the House Freedom Caucus, so you probably don't think doing nothing is an option. Some of you aren't in the House Freedom Caucus, but you're sitting in this room, so you probably don't think doing nothing is an option. The question then is, okay, well, what can we do? And I guess what you're going to get today is a couple of the paths forward where you guys can actually do something. You really are the power. When people talk about the people versus the legislature, that's a misunderstanding. You are the people. That is why you're here. You have relatively small districts. You know your people. Your people send you to act on their behalf. It's not direct democracy where the people vote on everything. It's a representative democracy. It's a republic. You guys are the people. So when they talk about the power belonging to the people, that's you. And a lot of legislatures for a long time have kind of forgotten that they have that power, forgot how they had to use it. And I think the founders would be kind of bummed out that they gave you all this power and you let all this happen, not you personally, but legislatures around this country have let a lot of stuff happen to this country when they could have stepped up and stopped it. So I'm not in the do nothing caucus, and I would assume neither of you are. I also point out that when they talk about the three types of constitutional conventions, where you rewrite, you revise, or you amend. An amendment, a calls for amendments, are calls for additions to a constitution. They are not calls for subtractions to the Constitution. When you amend a constitution by adding an amendment, and all of these calls are specific in that they say, for the purpose of proposing an amendment to Congress that limits congressional term limits, or that institutes a balanced budget amendment, or whatever the amendment you're proposing is an addition to the Constitution. It is not a revision that subtracts anything. You are not deleting anything from the Constitution. You are debating an addition to the Constitution. And that, again, is a critical difference that should be made. The Madison quote, which he was mentioning, you can look it up online. And again, look up a lot of this history, because a lot of what you had there was not historically accurate. The Madison quote has been used out of context every time I've ever testified on term limits, because Madison warns that, oh my God, not a convention, it would be populated by the worst sorts of scumbags. It was Madison's response to whether or not we should have a constitutional convention on the heels of the constitutional convention they had just completed. It was not saying don't have another constitutional, or don't have a constitutional convention. He had just been an enthusiastic participant in our constitutional convention. He was saying that just because you don't like the one we just did, we don't reopen it and start all over again. That's a bad idea. That is completely different, in completely different context than saying that Madison is somehow opposed to a constitutional convention. He was the star of a constitutional convention. He just didn't think 6 months later you should do it all over again. And on that, he was right. It also doesn't mean he said, oh, that article we gave you, yeah, whatever you do, don't use that. Okay? Madison would not do that. So when you hear the Madison quote being used that way, it's being abused that way, it's just not It's not how Madison said it, it's not how history records it, and it's not how we should allow it to be twisted. If I've got time left, we'll just get back to you guys, because I see you have a long day, and I'll see you when it's my 20 minutes.
Before we restart it,
Okay, great,
so that way we can,
yeah, that's great.
have a new recording on every single one.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Everybody here expresses love for the Constitution of the United States. And I'm pretty sure, however, that I'm the only one that's ever taught constitutional law at the collegiate level or any other formal kind of setting, as I did at Patrick Henry College for 17 years, an institution that I founded. In all my classes, I started by telling the students that I believe in constitutional originalism. That is, the Constitution should be interpreted by its original public meaning, as opposed to the living Constitution, which means that it can mean whatever left-leaning judges want it to be. And I think that my track record as a professor, as a law professor, is pretty good. Not only did my moot court teams win 12 national championships and 1 world championship, 6 of my students have clerked for the Supreme Court of the United States for Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and the Chief Justice. One of my former students, who's the Solicitor General of West Virginia currently, won a major Supreme Court victory of the case of West Virginia versus the EPA, which was a strong step in the right direction, eliminating the dominance of the bureaucracy. If you know anything about coal, it's a very important decision. My student won that case. I offer this background for 2 points that I believe may be helpful today. First, the fact that I'm training students who clerk for Alito and Thomas and are winning major Supreme Court cases that are for originalist kind of thinking should tell you I really am a constitutional originalist. And secondly, I hope it tells you that I believe in getting stuff done. I just don't go around opposing things or writing blogs. I get stuff done. And I hope and I believe this group should agree with me on those 2 things, that we're originalists and we like getting stuff done. So on that point, what I've done as a constitutional lawyer, professor, and scholar, a lot of my work has been to tear down legal myths that are detrimental to freedom, morality, and the sovereignty of our country. On the sovereignty point, I was personally the leading opponent of adopting the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The reason we don't have it today, HSLDA, which I was the president of, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, killed that treaty. And I was the leading opponent of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We killed it. How did we kill it? We argued successfully. Americans should make the law for America. We do not want international law governing the domestic policies of the United States. I argued and I won. I was the leading expert witness in the U.S. Senate on that question. The myth that was being advanced is that these treaties didn't apply to the United States. That was a lie, and I proved it was a lie, and we won the argument. Another myth that I've successfully defeated was that parents have neither the skill nor the right to homeschool their children. I was the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and through scholarship, activism, and frankly, out-lawyering the other side, but most of all, through the blessing of Almighty God, this anti-parent myth was defeated, and homeschooling freedom prevailed nationwide. My goal for you today is to make the case that the Wyoming legislature should use its constitutional authority. You have authority from the Constitution itself, from the founders, to stop the abuse of federal power in a manner endorsed by both the founders of the country and the founder of the John Birch Society. All agree with me that you should use your Article 5 power to stop the abuse of federal power. Now, I intend to prove that the myths you've heard today about the Article 5 process are both false and dangerous. And let me show you why. Well, for better or for worse, I'm the guy who dreamed up the Convention Stage Project. It started on my Facebook page about 12 years ago. I wrote a series of articles there and arguing for this effort to solve the problems of runaway federal government. Here's a snapshot of the problems I was trying to solve. First, the federal government takes too much of our money in taxes, spends too much of our money on projects that are unwise, unconstitutional, and this results in a debt that's so massive that it poses an existential crisis to our nation. Our great-grandchildren, I have 31 of those, I have 31 grandchildren, I have 1 great-grandchild, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren face a future that is so heavily mortgaged It's reprehensible and utterly shameful. According to Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, this is the second problem, all laws are supposed to be made by elected representatives of the people. There are 50 books of laws passed by Congress. There are 250 books of laws passed by the agencies, like the EPA and so on. We have 5 times as much law that's not been done by following Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution of the United States. Congress says it's delegating its authority to the agencies. No, they're not. Well, that's sort of true. What they're really doing is giving away the right of the people to throw the rascals out if we don't like the law. That's what a Republican form of government means, and they are violating a Republican form of government every day. The third point I was trying to solve is that Washington, D.C. is rigged in favor of Washington, D.C. If you let Washington, D.C. decide how much power Washington, D.C. should have, it's always going to have more power. The states are given the authority to stop all this. And my contention is, you ought to use your authority to stop it. You're like the parents, you're letting your kids get away with murder. It's time to stand up and give your child at least a spanking, if not take away their credit card and much more. The simple truth is this. The more federal power increases, the less our freedom exists, the less our property is safe. And we have got to stop this abuse of power by the only way that is written into the text of the Constitution. Now, Washington, D.C. will never solve the problem. Politics will never solve the problem alone. Why? Because people alone won't solve the problem. You need structure. You need things like, if there was an amendment that said you had to have a 2/3 majority to pass a tax increase in Congress, that would be binding. It would work. It would be harder to pass tax increases. You have to have a 2/3 majority to pass a bill regulating, things within the states. That'd be harder. Structural powers matter. If you have a single subject rule, that would matter. That would stop things that are going on that are wrong. Politics can't solve everything. Politics are good. I've done my part in that share. But we have got to follow the rule. No power should go unchecked in this country. That's why we have federalism. No power should go unchecked. That's why we have checks and balances. No power should go unchecked. And that's the reason on the last week of the Constitutional Convention, I've actually read the whole thing. I've read the entire record, everything that exists, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. And I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours writing that article that's in front of you now. They said, George Mason said, the reason that Article 5 reads the way it does is, he said, someday this government's going to abuse its power. And when that comes, Congress will never reduce its own power and propose an amendment. So if Congress alone can propose amendments, you'll never get an amendment to the Constitution reducing federal power. It just won't happen. Look at human nature. America may be good people, but we're all sinners. And this government was written on the Christian principles of America, and the Christian principles of America is all men are sinners, and we can't give anybody too much power. Why? Because all men are sinners. And the reason that Article 5 is written the way it is because all men are sinners. You can't give anybody too much power. And the states, not Congress, should decide how much power the federal government should have. How do you do that? You do that through this Article 5 process. Now, 19 conservative states have passed the Convention of States project that I drafted. We are asking for term limits on federal officials, fiscal restraints to be imposed on the power of the federal government. It's bigger than a balanced budget. It's a balanced budget plus tax limitations plus spending limitations. And other reductions of federal power, such as get rid of the Federal Department of Education, such as get the Commerce Clause construed correctly, such as stopping the fact that 198 out of 200 treaties this country enters into are signed by the president alone. They're not sent to the Senate for ratification. We got to stop stuff like that because they're using loopholes in the Constitution to get around that kind of nonsense. Now, I would assume that if some kind of political magic could be given, and when we had final constitutional amendments before you to do some of this stuff, and they were well written, you guys would pass them overwhelmingly. It's the process that you got to be concerned about, and I'm going to answer some of the process questions. Now, I want to point out to you, the left, and you got a pretty good list of the left out there that hates us. I go in state legislatures all over the country. The John Birch Society representative sits next to the Common Cause representative, and they sing off the same song sheet every state. They're telling the same things. They have different motives. The John Birch Society really does believe in this runaway nonsense. But the left hates us because they know that we're the biggest threat to the big government utopian dreams that they have, and they hate our guts as a result of that. And so that's why they're trying to stop us. So I'm going to deal with the myths. The first myth is the one that I consider to be reprehensible, that the Constitution was illegally adopted. It's like saying, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, but I don't believe the Bible is really the Word of God. It's just a bunch of stories written by men. Now, it's good stories. I like the stories. They're wonderful stories, but it was just stories written by men. It wasn't really the Word of God. It's that level of incongruity that you're hearing from them today. I'm going to give you the full version of the story, but you've got the really full version in your hands. What happened is this. We start with the Annapolis Convention. The Annapolis Convention was called to talk about commerce. Only a handful of states showed up, and the delegates quickly decided two things. We don't have enough authority, and we don't have enough states. Let's go back and ask who are states for more authority to have a convention, and let's get more states to come. What was the authority they were asking for? To render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. Who called the convention? Virginia was the first state to call the convention, not Congress. Congress didn't call the convention. The states called the convention. 5 more states immediately followed Virginia. They named their delegates, they gave them their instructions. Their commission was to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union, and I'm quoting that directly. Then Congress voted to give their opinion about it. It's like a National Pickle Week resolution. There's no more authority than that. You have in your packet the process for amending the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress can't call any convention. Under the Articles of Convention, you know a lick of history. You know that Congress can't have, they had no implied powers. They didn't call the convention. They didn't even send a resolution to the states. And they always sent the resolutions to the states if they're asking the states to do something. They did not call the convention. Congress in its endorsement resolution said we like the resolution, but we think we should only amend the Articles of Confederation. It was not the call of the convention. There was debate at the convention about their authority. What did they do when they debated it? They looked at their commissions from the states. The states gave them their instructions, except for New York. Every state told their delegates to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. She's right. New York left. 2 of the delegates from New York left after they decided they were going to pursue a new document. Now, New York never voted again, so the New York delegates didn't violate the convention, but the delegates obeyed their instructions. The 10 states that continued to participate obeyed their instructions to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. The left makes the arguments that they make because they say, well, then you can't be originalists. Because, you get all about the original intent. It was illegally adopted. That's why Warren Burger, who got Phyllis Schlafly to do this, to launch this modern argument about the runaway convention. That's what happened to change the John Birch Society, they're doing Warren Burger's dirty work for him. There was 19 states that had called for a convention of the states to reverse Roe versus Wade. Warren Burger and Phyllis Schlafly were both on the Bicentennial of the Constitution Commission. And Warren Burger wrote a letter to Phyllis Schlafly and told the lie about Philadelphia, and got her to go to 6 states and reverse the call for a convention of states to stop Roe versus Wade. It killed the pro-life movement's effort to get that done in its tracks. We've had 29 million abortions between the time Warren Burger wrote his letter and when our legal team helped reverse Roe versus Wade in Dobbs. The John Birch Society has the blood of those millions of babies on their hands because they spread Warren Burger's lie and got 6 states to reverse their call for a convention of the states. We could have reversed Roe versus Wade decades ago. Millions of babies. The blood is on their hands. When we started the Convention of States project, the national debt was $16 trillion. It's $36 trillion as of today. $20 trillion is on their backs. They have told everybody, it's dangerous. Well, which is more dangerous? Their fanciful ideas that this is going to be a runaway? It's nonsense. Listen to her own Chile story. What did she say? First of all, the people called for a constitutional convention. They didn't use the process. So this is an extra legal thing to begin with. But guess what happened? It was defeated. The safety mechanisms work. In her own horror stories that she tells, where she goes around the country defending Pinochet, this radical right-wing dictator, murdered people. It worked. The process worked. They defeated it twice. The checks and balances worked. If it works in Chile, why won't it work in the United States of America? We follow our Constitution. We revere our Constitution. It's not a mob calling for it. It's state legislatures calling for it. Now, people will say, well, anything could happen at a convention. No, it can't. The Republican National Convention can't elect the delegates, can't nominate a Democrat for president of the United States. You can't pass laws for France. If you have a convention in Wyoming, your Republican Party convention in Wyoming, you can't pass laws for Idaho. There are limits on what you can do. And the call of the convention is the limit. Now, can that be enforced? Yes. I personally litigated the best case on record that is the parallel. The ERA was supposed to be ratified in 7 years. Congress tried to change the rules for ratifying the Constitution of the United States. I filed the first lawsuit, as a young lawyer, filed the first lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of changing the rules for amending the Constitution. We got that case heard in federal court in Boise, Idaho. Idaho and Arizona filed a similar case. We consolidated the cases. We worked together. We won that case. You can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. They tried to revive the ERA, and the courts, even including the Obama courts, have said you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. You've got to have an agreement. There are 450 applications for a constitutional amendments convention right now on the books. More than 34, well more than 34. We haven't had one because 34 states have never agreed on the topic. When you have an agreement on the topic, you have a convention on that topic, and not until then. It's not just open for anything. Yes, it can be one amendment. Yes, there can be more amendments. So the language from the constitutional amendments just means you can have more than one amendment. We're contemplating more than one amendment. Fiscal restraints, term limits, limitations of the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. But just like the Bill of Rights, they would be set out individually, and the states would vote the individual amendments up or down. Now, you guys are going to hold a legislative session starting in January. Are you really afraid that the Democrats in the House, your 6 Democrats, are going to propose gun control legislation and you're going to lose? Well, who knows? I mean, Soros could bribe them, and who knows? And we don't have, you haven't established your rules. You haven't got your rules yet for the next session. You don't have them. You haven't voted on them yet. You don't have rules yet about, the sky is falling and there might be locusts, and who knows? You don't. That's absurd. Why? Because you can count. 6 doesn't beat your team. And if 34 states call for a convention to limit the power of the federal government, you walk in with delegates from 34 states voting one state, one vote, and they at most have 16. Let's assume all of the other states are against us. 34 beats 16 every single time. I don't care what crazy things you think might happen. 34 beats 16 every single time. You may not get everything you want, but you can stop anything crazy. Why? Because we can count. It's the same reason you're not afraid to open the Wyoming legislature and are afraid of the Democrats here. It's nonsense. It's preposterous. And that kind of fear-mongering, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power and sound mind. This is the land of the free because we're brave, not because we're fear-mongers. Not because, what might happen, blah, 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 throw dust in the air. It's nonsense. It's anti-historical, Constitution-defaming nonsense. And I respectfully suggest this. You guys have been misled until today, perhaps. At least some of you have been misled until today. Now you know the truth. Now you know the truth about how we got the Constitution. I would suggest to you, there's a rule that we give in juries. If somebody lies to you about one thing, you can distrust their testimony about everything. If they lie to you about the Constitution of the United States, you can distrust everything else they say to you. Because nothing is more precious than the integrity of the Constitution of the United States. Now you know the truth. You have the authority and the moral responsibility. The trillions of dollars of debt are on your back at this point in time. If you let it go forward and don't address the debt that this country is facing and the runaway federal power, the responsibility is on your backs now. Don't listen to the fearmongers. Be the land of the free, the home of the brave. Use the Constitution. Do what the founder of the John Birch Society said to do, for heaven's sakes. Let's get some limitations on federal power that are structural in nature, and let's bring this nonsense to a freedom-loving end. God bless you. Thank you for your time.
Next time I don't follow Ferris. What would I say? How would I say it? I don't necessarily have a lot from a rebuttal standpoint on that, statements and all, but sit down and as your brain tends to do once you're done speaking, you think of all the things that, I'm sorry, I'll get a little louder. You sit down and you start to think, oh, you know what I forgot to say was X, Y, and Z, so I want to revisit a couple things from the first presentation just because I think they're important facts for you to have, and they weren't in my 20-minute thing. There was a mention that what Chile couldn't explain what the problem was in their constitution. We don't have that problem. We know exactly what the problem is. A lot of the founders warned you at the very beginning. They were concerned that they hadn't put a balanced budget amendment into the Constitution. That the federal government had the ability to borrow and print endlessly, and so that was a concern right away. We know what's missing as far as our national debt. We know that term limits requires a constitutional amendment. We know this because as states, we tried to pass term limits at the state level. I'm originally a Colorado guy. We were the first state to pass term limits on our elected officials. And after a bunch of states had done that, a lawmaker sued, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do it that way. It has to be a constitutional amendment. So we know exactly what the deficiency is, what's lacking in the current Constitution is an amendment that limits the number of terms for members of Congress. There's no gray area here, so if you hear that Chile was confused, don't be Chile, we're not Chile. We're way better than Chile, we know exactly what's missing, we know exactly what the language needs to say. There was also a mention that that we were trying something somehow new or radical that we haven't done since 1787. Actually, what we're talking about doing is the only thing we've done since 1787. Since you had Article 5, the states have used the pressure of Article 5 to tell the federal government what it wants. Okay, your Bill of Rights was a result of Article 5 pressure because Madison knew, hearing from the folks who did the convention, that there was unfinished business. There was things that folks wanted done, they didn't get done in that initial draft. Y'all have been through the process, or a lot of you have been through the process. It's not always in that first product. You pass the bill, you come back, you amend the bill. There were things the states wanted that weren't taken care of in the original Constitution. So he went through the Article 5 calls from the states, took the 12 most popular things that had the broadest support, sent all 12 out, 10 got ratified and became your Bill of Rights. That's all we're doing. It's the states telling the federal government, this is what we want. Do this. If you don't do this, we will. We've been doing this since 1787. So we're not talking about doing something new or dramatic or dangerous. They gave us an instruction manual in the Constitution. We're just following that. So those are the only things that I wanted to add from before. I'll save the rest for my 20 minutes. And again, yield back the balance of my time. I think that's how it's done.
Yes.
I'll take your balance if you don't mind. I want to reiterate one of the first things that was said is, house divided against itself cannot stand. And we do not want this issue to be divisive amongst us. We all have a job to do. We can have differing opinions. I have a lot of people that I admire that are on the other side of the fence. Alan West, I got to meet him and talk to him a little bit. Mark Levin, great people, great minds. They're just wrong. You as new legislators, and there's not a lot of new legislators in here, get this sudden urge to do something. I get emails every day from a lot of you saying, what about this, what about this, we can do this. That's good. I don't want to put a dampen on the enthusiasm. I just want you to know that it's hard to get something done. And sometimes in our fervor to just do something is, we want to be a doer, one who gets things done. We just heard about that. we end up doing something that isn't necessarily attacking the problem at hand. There's a bit of a misdiagnosis here in my mind, and Dalton, my buddy back there, he had a problem not too long ago where every time he broke wind, it went Honda. And it was pretty embarrassing, he didn't know what to do, so he called a bunch of specialists, and the specialists got together and they argued about what body part to remove and what to poke and what to prod and all those things. And it kind of scared him. So Dalton calls up John Winter there, because he knows John Winter's got a lot of practical sense. And he called John, he says, can I talk to you about my problem? And sure, John says, sure, you describe it. Says, well, when I break wind, I go Honda. John says, oh, you got a bad tooth. Haven't you heard that an abscess makes the fart go Honda? The point is a misdiagnosis. The Constitution is not the problem. The Constitution is the answer. We are living that here in this room. We heard there were 6 Democrats. How many of you believe there were 6 Democrats in the House just last year? Okay, 5 of them would admit they were Democrats. But we know the real count was more like 36 to 26. And what happened? You look back at Wyoming over the last 6 years, and we had 4 conservatives, 5 conservatives in the House. Now look at it. We're pushing 40, folks. That's Wyoming's term limit. Sitting right back there, that's Cyrus Westman's term limit. Sitting. It works both ways. I just looked up and saw Sarah, and it breaks my heart. That's how the game is played. We have all the tools that we need. The problem is not the Constitution. The problem is an apathetic, ignorant voter population. But what's been happening in Wyoming for the last 10 years? A virtual revolution, and you guys, every one of you, are living proof of that. You're the answer. We have the answer. We set an example here in Wyoming. We set an example for the United States. We don't take the risks. I happen to believe in the risks that are mentioned there. And I'm not going to resort to personal attacks and say somebody's lying and all the other whatever that comes out here. When we get done with this debate, I'm going to have to go sit down with Jacob and work on a bill. We got to work together. He may be on the other side, but we got to lay that out. And it does not help when you use inflammatory terminology and you degrade other people. Now, I don't have a big, long resume with all these degrees on it. I'm a cabinet maker. I even got the thumb to prove it. I do. It's in my desk drawer now. Folks, it's really simple. We have the answer. We here in Wyoming, you in this room, are that. We can change everything. Let's do it.
And we're ready for the 3rd round, so now U.S. term limits will have 20 minutes.
It's gonna be a real letdown after the first year. I'm gonna cheat. I usually go without notes, but I've got some quotes that I brought. I wanna make sure you get the quotes right, so I usually don't only get 20 minutes. Usually I get like 5 or 6, so I've got the elevator speech, but the long one. We hear it a lot. The Constitution is the answer. So whatever you do, please, dear God, don't use the Constitution. I would suggest that's not logical, it's not rational, it's not going to fix things. Yes, the Constitution's in the answer. We're literally here debating Article 5 of the Constitution. By way of introduction, my name is Constantine Carrard. Again, CQ's fine, I'm the Western Regional guy for term limits. Colorado by birth, Wyoming's my dad's home place. My grandfather was a infantryman for France in World War I, and when that was over, he moved to Wyoming and set type with local paper in Laramie. So dad is he's Laramie High School and University of Wyoming, class of '59. I told him I'd be here. He said, "Well, say hi." And I said, "I will." And I paused, and he goes, "No one's going to say hi back. It's class of '59." I said, "Okay." So he's not expecting any hi backs, but my father says hi. So if anybody knows a Carrard or has ever heard the name, to a degree in this country, Wyoming's actually kind of where the family name started. I'm just gonna focus on term limits now, because that's kind of my sole thing. You guys have heard a lot of passionate debate about the process, the legality, all that sort of stuff. Dealing specifically with term limits, Congress was never supposed to be a career. It was not supposed to be a full-time job. Heck, it didn't even pay when you first went to Congress. The job was not even a paying job. It wasn't supposed to be something lucrative. Now it has become incredibly lucrative. It's not that they make 170 grand a year, which is pretty good money. They got to live in 2 states. They got expenses actually that we don't have as a result. And yet somehow they seem to be doing better than the average person making $170,000 a year does. I'm told the insider trading is pretty spectacular. But for a lot of folks in Congress, and if you know some, you've probably seen it, it is the best job they've ever had. It's the best job they're ever going to have. And unfortunately what happens, that means they wake up every day and their one concern is, how do I keep this job? And so they tend to kind of vote yes on a lot of everything. They tend not to be responsive to the people back home. And the good news for them is that the system, as it is currently designed, makes it to where it's almost impossible to beat them, so they can plan on staying there forever if they want to. I would distinguish, because there was mention of term limits working, where you need term limits because you can beat people and look at the new people here. I'm not here to advocate for term limits for the state of Wyoming. Most states don't necessarily need term limits. They're not broken the way DC is broken. You don't have the advantages of incumbency that DC has. You don't have millions of dollars in super PACs, leadership PACs, a lot of stuff coming in. You don't have the advantage of the name ID. You're not campaigning across the district with 890,000 voters, where you need those kind of resources to communicate. People in your district know you. They vote for you, they vote for the other candidate because they know you. So the challenges we face with campaigns in DC are dramatically different than what you have here. Once you consider 2 data points, Fox News ran an exit poll, about 120,000 people nationally on election day. The right track, wrong track number, wrong track was about 70%. That's really bad. I mean, people are generally down on politics, but when the polling says 70% wrong track, that's bad, but that's kind of the unremarkable number. They asked a second question that was great. It said, how much change did they want in the way the US was run? It's kind of a weird way to phrase the question. At one end was none, and at the other end was the phrase total upheaval, which is kind of a weird way of polling, but okay. 2% said none, 15% wanted a small change, 56% wanted a substantial change, 26% wanted total upheaval. Okay, so if you take the substantial and total upheaval numbers compared to the it's fine as it is, that's 82 to 2. And yet virtually every incumbent member of Congress was reelected on the same day. So I don't have to tell you there's a problem when it comes to swapping out members of Congress who aren't doing their job. If you ever need 5 seconds, the 5-second pitch is basically, this is one of the world's most unpopular groups of people who can't be beaten in a popularity contest. That's the quick little version. Now I got one of the quotes for you. The average American is acutely aware that he is losing his liberty. The government has grown so huge and complex that he feels helpless in attempting to control it. Amen to that. Congress is the problem. Congress is broken beyond repair. You can blame the constituents, blame the people with their hands out, blame the lobbyists, blame the bureaucrats, blame whatever you want to do. Fine, that's fair. But the fact of the matter is that Congress is broken. And we are never going to elect the hundreds of fresh representatives and senators you would need to actually get Congress to fix itself. Just send more people. Man, I hear that all the time. Oh, if you would just send more people. From the same people that tell you that Congress is absolutely and totally corrupting and you won't believe what it does to good people here. Okay. So that's why you have to change the rules. Got another quote. It says, going about it piecemeal, abolishing a welfare program here, a regulation there, and restoring a few freedoms along the way would take forever. That is also true. Wouldn't it be great if there was a way to fix these problems permanently? Let's restore the concept of public service. Let's retire career politicians, defame the lobbyists, defund the bureaucracy. The answer, as we all know, is in the Constitution. Here's another quote. There is, however, a much faster and simpler way of reducing the size and power of government and restoring individual liberties. Amend the Constitution to reinstate the constitutionally limited government envisioned by our founding fathers. We've heard the history, and so I'm going to skip some of this, which is good because you guys get back all the time I can. But basically, Article 5 was originally drafted where Congress would propose amendments and the states would ratify. And before the debate was concluded, founders said, well, hang on, what if Congress is the problem? Congress would never send out an amendment to limit its own power. And so before they ratified the Constitution, They made Article 5 to where the states, the people, the legislatures, you all, as the supreme power, were the only people who could both propose and ratify amendments. Because the federal government works for us, or it used to. It should again. Quote, this country consists of a union of sovereign states which hold the only power to ratify amendments, that's you guys, and state legislatures hold concurrent power under the Constitution to initiate such amendments as they, the states and the people within them, require. So you are the highest power, you are the people. Congress is the problem, Congress will not reform itself. It's kind of obvious where I'm going. You can tell. Congress gave you all the power. I think the founders gave you the power. I think the founders might be kind of stunned, frankly, that you're almost $40 trillion in debt, and you got this imperial Congress just running your lives, and you haven't used the power they gave you. They went to an awful lot of trouble and put themselves at an awful lot of risk to do this, and we're just saying, no, I'm good. We love the Constitution, we're just kind of afraid to use it. Another quote, only through an amendment will we be able to correct the present distortion of our basic laws. Okay, so let's talk about term limits specifically. It is America's most popular reform. It polls, and by the way, by way of background, I'm a campaign guy. I spend most of my time getting folks like you elected to office. So, you know, I'm always aware kind of like where the public is at stuff. This thing polls at absurdly high levels. It's 80 to 85% across party lines, Republican, Democrats, Independents. Doesn't matter whose door you knock on, you know you can use this issue. And when I say it's 85%, it's not 85-15, it'll be 85, 8, and 7 undecideds. If you take the undecideds, you force them to decide, you end up around a 90-10 issue. You can pull a puppy from a well, and you don't get 90-10. Okay, so it's a really popular issue. The people really want this. Every Republican running for president endorsed it, except Asa Hutchinson. You saw what happened to him. President Trump recently reiterated his call for congressional term limits. Lobbyists hate it, the bureaucrats hate it, career politicians hate it. There's some really good people in Congress who supported it, but they've been there for a while and they've discovered that we really need them there. Like, I was gonna go for a while, but now that I've been here, I realize how important I am to this process, and so I think I should stay forever. So there's a few of them, they hate it, but the people want it, and they want it more than any other measure we measure for. So what changes if we have term limits? The biggest change is the type of person you send to Congress, and we have sort of a wonkish term we call adverse pre-selection. Basically the wrong people running for Congress. There are some great members of Congress, okay? I got some I am particularly really fond of. They are in the minority of the majority at the moment. But you got the wrong people going to Congress. I always use like the Elon Musk example, but who are the change agents? Who are the people who know how to fix things, who could turn around a company, a healthcare system, university system? Who are the folks who say, okay, I know how to fix something? Go to that person and say, you, sir, we want you to run for Congress. You're amazing, you're smart, you do all this stuff. We need your skills in Congress. And here's how it's gonna work. We're all gonna get together, we're gonna work hard, we're gonna get you elected. We need you to kind of stay quiet for a while. But in about 14 years, you're gonna get a subcommittee chairmanship. Now, to be fair, it may not be the subcommittee you want, and it may not be the area of expertise you have. It's the subcommittee that's available after all the other subcommittees have been picked over by people who have more seniority. But that's where your power starts. And 6 to 8 years later, maybe around years 22 to 24, we're gonna get you a full committee chairmanship. Again, it may not be the committee you want, and it may not be the committee he has any particular expertise in, so when you're trying to figure out why the farmer's running healthcare and the doctor's running ag, well, pharma dollars are great, and the ag guy who gets first choice says, I'll take healthcare, please. But don't worry about it, because if you don't know the subject material, we've got staff, and they'll guide you through the whole process. He's never gonna run for Congress. I'm a doer, I'm a fixer. I'm not gonna wait a quarter century to accumulate potential power. Like 20 years after I get to Congress, I won't remember what I was there for. So who runs for Congress? Two types. The true believers who want to run through that wall and fix things. And they're usually home in about 6 years. They give up. They turn around and they go, no, it's not for me, and I'm out. The people who leave early will be shocked. Why'd you leave early? Because they went to do something that can't be done. Or the lifers. The folks who are willing to wait. Because frankly, they're not real change agents. Or it's the best job they've ever had and it's the best job they're ever going to have. So you go back to a system where, and I'm not here to propose, by the way, we don't propose specific limits because people get so wrapped around the axle of what that number should be, they lose track of it. The question is, should this be a career or something you go for a time, do, and then come home? But if I use, like, let's say, like a 12-year example, after 6 years, you're looking at a chairmanship of some sort, right? And your chairmanship is more likely to be in tune with your expertise, because I got a lot of guys that have been there 6, 7, 8 years, and I need someone to run this ag subcommittee on water. This guy knows it, so put him in charge. That's how you guys do it here at the state level. So that's sort of the biggest change, but there's some other changes. Listen, if you increase the number of open seat contests, you encourage more candidates, you create more opportunities. You can run against an incumbent, but a successful challenge against an incumbent averages at least $2 million. So most of you will never run against an incumbent because you don't have the Rolodex for that. So a lot of good people who could run for office won't even try. Increasing open seat contests also allow, frankly, for states to kind of course correct. It's sort of like a Mitch McConnell example. You can't beat Mitch McConnell in a Republican primary in Kentucky. You can't beat him in the general because he's the Republican nominee. But if there's an open seat in Kentucky right now, and I step up to the candidate who says, I'm gonna go to DC and vote just like Mitch McConnell, I will finish last. Because the candidate who will run and vote just like Mitch McConnell will finish last. But I can't beat Mitch McConnell. That's a problem. I mentioned the fact that, yeah, your committees, I think, stop being based so much on seniority and start being based more on expertise, which is good. And there have been some studies that compare states that have term limits to states that don't. And you'll find termlimits.com's a website, it's got some information on that study there, but they basically find that states that have it generally enjoy better economic growth, lower taxes, less regulation. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the lawmakers tend to be a little more deliberate in the language. If you're there for a time and you're trying to get something done, you're in for office to do something, you write the bill to do that thing. You're not vague, you don't leave it, you don't defer to the bureaucracy to fill in the rules, which is a healthy thing. So the people want it. It will dramatically improve the work quality. It will dramatically improve the quality of your candidates and their responsiveness to you. It'll radically change the mindset of the people in Congress, right? Because if I'm there for 12 years to get something done, I don't have time to waste playing games. I'm not just running out the clock. And I think we can get rid of some of those over-obedient, just rubber stamping big spenders that are kind of trampling all over us. So how do you get it? Well, you can go convention of states. That's got it. If you like it, by all means. The single subject effort works just fine. Vote yes on both if you want. You don't have to pick one. The first one past the gate gets it done. I will add that there's one thing that kind of makes us different from COS, and that's the fact we're single subject. The issue is preemption. I've got a handout, come to think of it, I'll pass that later. For 240 years, you haven't had an amendment convention, so I'll make the point that we've never had one. One of the reasons you haven't had one, they talk about, well, because 34 states haven't agreed. Actually, one of the reasons you haven't had a number of them is because when you get close, Congress acts. Congress will not be inclined to let us gather in one room and write their term limits, because they're going to want to grandfather themselves in. They're going to want longer limits than we want. They're going to have all sorts of things they want we wouldn't want. Congress will never let us gather in one room and write a balanced budget amendment. They're going to let us set the rules for how they get to spend money? Hell no. They also won't do it until we make them do it. And so how preemption works basically is the states say, you do this or we will. And Congress goes, and ignores us until you get close to that magic number. Because if it takes 34 states and I'm at 28, 29, 30, 31 states, I got a bunch of states considering this, Congress can't risk that I get to 34 before they send me something to ratify. And so Congress will preempt the states, which is what they've done historically. Okay, we've got this strategy has a 240-year unbeaten track record. So anybody wants to check the historical records, the Bill of Rights again was state pressure early. Term limits on the presidents was state pressure, as FDR went from term 3 to term 4. Women's right to vote. You know, if you're a woman, you're sitting here, and you appreciate the right to vote, thank Article 5 and Article 5 pressure on the Congress. This works. I am not a proponent of the 17th Amendment, but if you wanted a clearer example of how this strategy just never loses, the U.S. Senate had no reason to change the rules on how U.S. senators got appointed. How they all got their jobs. The U.S. Senate would never, of its own volition, change the rules. But enough states said, you do this or we will. Congress says, okay. And then they do it. And that's what we're doing here. And I mention that because, again, I'm fine with the convention. But there may be some of you here who just can't get past it. And if you can't get past it, I hope you support this one anyway, because this one's never going to a convention. Congress will preempt. It has always preempted. For a quarter of a millennia, this has worked. So from that standpoint, preemption is kind of the main difference, so I want to spend a little bit of time on that. I would also point out it's the only way you're ever gonna get term limits, so if you support term limits, this is the only path. I always kind of joke, I say, you can't tell your people that you believe in long, healthy lives, you're just fundamentally supposed to die next to something. It's like, there's just the one way. Congress will never do this on its own until it has to. It won't have to until you make it, and this is how you make it. It's the only path. So from that standpoint, I hope it's kind of clear. I should point out that I've read you a number of quotes. They all actually come from the same person. Former Congressman Larry McDonald of Georgia was a leading voice against communism and a conservative in the United States Congress. He was a longtime Birch board member. He was actually the Birch Society's second chairman. And I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember Korean Airlines Flight 007 that the Soviets shot down ostensibly by mistake. He was on that flight. So it was, they accidentally shot down one of the leading anti-communist voices in Congress back in the year 81, something like that, a long time ago. It was sometime after that, obviously, that the Birch Society's position evolved. But that's why you'll still find a lot of Birch members who actually do support it, even though the majority of the literature obviously is against it. We're gonna be around, I'll stick around afterwards, I'll have that little preemption thing. Maybe I'll hand it out right after so I don't interrupt the rebuttals. Again, I know some of you have, we do have term limits pledges that we have candidates and lawmakers have signed, because they love term limits, they sign it, they put it up on their social media and stuff, and so if you like term limits and you wanna do it, that's great, we're always happy to promote the folks who stand with us. Like I said, this is incredibly popular. It is the right thing to do. It is not a silver bullet that will fix everything in Washington DC, but boy, it will help a lot in a lot of ways. There's no argument to leave them in place forever, and this is the only way to take them out. So from that standpoint, and I think combined with preemption, hopefully I've overcome everybody's objections. This thing will pass by acclamation and piece of cake. But I appreciate the time again, and congratulations again. Like I spend most of my time getting folks elected, so I know the journey you've been on. I know what it feels like. Congrats. I mean, you guys are, for those, especially the first timers, man, you're off on an adventure right now, so have fun. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Trey has 5 minutes.
They're both in favor of convention. I'm the only one opposed, but I'll do my best in 5 minutes here. He mentioned that they always preempt this, that you can make Congress afraid. Did you know that the balanced budget amendment came to 32 applications for it? They only needed 34. Did Congress act? Did they suddenly say, oh, we're so scared of you states, we're going to implement the balanced budget? No, they did not. So this, using it will make Congress fearful of you, and they will behave if we just have enough applications, is playing with fire. I want to remind you that the Constitution already limits the federal government. That is its entire purpose, is to limit the federal government. So if there is nothing that doesn't already exist in the Constitution that would not hold us accountable. Because he was the last speaker, I am not a constitutional attorney, I'm a simple homeschool mom, okay? So I will let you listen to the wisdom of our founding fathers, because I'm nowhere near as smart as them. Alexander Hamilton said on term limits, nothing appears more plausible at first sight, nor more ill-founded upon close inspection on term limits. John Adams said, there is no right clearer and few or more importance than that the people should be at liberty to choose the ablest and best men. Term limits would take away the rights of the voters to support the people that they think are ablest and best. Remember that unintended consequences of something that appears plausible at first sight. Sam Adams said, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruins. Is there an advantage to having experienced legislators in DC that are good? I know they're rare. I know they're only 1 or 2%. But are we willing to throw out the good ones with the bad ones by imposing term limits upon them? Roger Sherman talked about as long as a man behaves himself well, he is never turned out of office. We must hold them accountable to behaving well. We, the voters, are to hold them accountable. Gouverneur Morris said, tended to destroy the great motive to good behavior, the hope of being rewarded by reappointment. It is their behavior that we are to be judging them on. Sadly, the average voter has no clue what their representatives are doing, not you here in Wyoming, and especially not in DC, that's so far away from them. But who's actually doing something about it? We at the Birch Society have something called the Freedom Index. I have it there laying on me, and I have more on a table there. We actually educate the voters on your scores, and you here in Wyoming also. Some of you got elected because we revealed the bad scores of the people that you were running against. And many of you have been awarded by me personally or by our members with a 100% certificate in front of your constituents, of which I made sure of, that they knew that you were the kind of people that we need to continue to support. We are out there awarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. That is what you should do for term limits. You know we actually have term limits. It's called an election. Every 2 years, our U.S. House of Representatives, we have a chance to throw out the bumps. Samuel Adams said, frequent elections of the people. The Articles of Confederation had term limits, and yet the Founding Fathers debated and made sure that it was not in our current Constitution. Frequent elections of the people. They may indeed be deceived by their choice. They sometimes are. But the evil is not incurable. The remedy is always near. They will feel their mistakes and correct them. May I use Wyoming as the example? You chose Liz Cheney. I'm sorry, many of you probably did not. But Wyoming chose Liz Cheney. You saw the evil that she committed, that she did not support the people of Wyoming, and you corrected that with one of our 100% legislators, Harriet Hagman. You did that. You corrected that error. You don't have to wait for term limits. You can kick them out anytime. The most important issue on term limits is the fact you know what lame duck session is? Lame duck session, we're currently in it. That means they've been elected out, but they're still in office to cause trouble. If you have term limits, that means that every House representative knows that they have 2 more years of which they are no longer accountable to the voters, but they are still in office and can cause trouble for 2 years. Wait a minute, what about senators? Oh, holy smokes, that means you put them into a 6-year term limit. This debate is not about what amendments to have. It is about whether we should have a convention or not. Amend all that you want. Do
Yes.
not take the risk of
Thank you, Leah.
convention.
Thank you. Convention of States.
Thank you again for your time. A couple of quick preliminaries. First of all, Leah perfectly appropriately for a debater said that what you're going to hear from us is not true. The assurances that we would give you about the safety of the convention, she said it's not true. I got up and said the history she gave you about how the Constitution was adopted was not true. It's not a personal attack to say that what the other side told you is not true. You just got to set the record straight. Leah's a great lady. She's done a lot of good things. Her heart's in the right place. I just think she's wrong about these things. So those aren't personal attacks. It's just we're pointing out what the other side said was not true. Now, quickly about preemption. I think CQ is right that preemption normally is the case, and I think on term limits that very likely to happen. You get to 30, 34 states or 30, 31 states for a term limits application, you're likely to see something coming from Congress. I think Leah is right when she said it didn't come from the balanced budget amendment because of change that's big enough, they won't do it. They just won't do it. Ours is that big change. Ours is bigger than a balanced budget because we will say tax limitations, spending limitations, we're going to fix the Commerce Clause, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, we're going to say you can only have 9 Supreme Court justices, and so on. Ours is big enough. They can't preempt it because we're covering more ground than any single subject can do. So I think preemption was probably true for term limits, but I don't think it's true always. Now, I'm going to address, with the last time I have, the question of, is the Constitution a problem? There's a big book that I didn't carry because it's too heavy and I'm 74 years old and I just can't carry stuff as much anymore, especially when I'm flying across the country. It's called The Constitution of the United States. That's the name of the book. It's put out by the U.S. government printing press. What it is the Constitution with all the court decisions interpreted. You've got the Constitution as written, and you've got the Constitution as interpreted. Many of the amendments were fixing Supreme Court interpretations. The 11th Amendment fixed a Supreme Court interpretation about suing the states. The 13th Amendment was there to fix a Supreme Court interpretation called Dred Scott. 14th Amendment falls in that same category. 15th Amendment, pretty much the same category. Minor versus Happersett was a case to try to give women the right to vote under the Equal Protection Clause, which they should have had. Wyoming got that right historically, early, but it should have been done by the 14th Amendment. Supreme Court got it wrong. 19th Amendment corrected that. So we often have used the amending process to correct the Constitution as interpreted. The General Welfare Clause was meant to be a limitation on government spending, not a blank check. Why did it become a blank check? Is because the Supreme Court did an interpretation of that in the Butler case. Who murdered our debt? The Butler did it. And it was the Supreme Court that did that. We need to correct that interpretation. And so the constitutional amending process for correcting either gaps, like the number of justices on the Supreme Court is not fixed. Congress can change it anytime they want. And I guarantee you the next time Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they're going to increase it. They're going to jam the court. They will do it. And you want to know a threat to the Second Amendment? That's the threat. The DC versus Heller case was decided 5-4. The Supreme Court gets packed by the Democrats. Very realistically, that could happen. And then the Second Amendment was interpreted to be only for the militia, not for a personal right. That was what the 4 justices said. Your Second Amendment rights are gone overnight. And how can you fix it? The only way to fix it is the Article 5 Convention of the States process. And so if you want to fix the problems of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution and some of the gaps, like number of Supreme Court justices and a balanced budget rule, then the Convention of the States process is there. The 38 states have to ratify. Even in Chile, they had to ratify it. And they used the old rules to ratify it. And it failed. The bad stuff failed because they used the rules to ratify it. They can't pass stuff in that's crazy with 30. It's hard. Lee is right. It's supposed to be hard. Getting to 34 states is hard. Getting to 38 states, even harder. It's hard. It's supposed to be hard. But crazy stuff can't happen. Good stuff, it's hard. Crazy stuff just can't get through it. Why? We can count. And if we're afraid of our own shadows and afraid of using the power the founders gave you, and we're just too afraid. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service to the people of Wyoming.
In just a moment, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get back to the FGA training. And folks,